This is the continued story of the book I Saw God's Hand by E.L. Martin, as retold to the children of the Watertown SDA Church Primary Sabbath School. I'm your storyteller, Austin Bacchus. Let's go.
Chapter 8 from E.L. Martin, I Saw God's Hand. This chapter is called It Must Have Been an Angel. When Alma and I and the children returned to mission service after World War II, we were assigned to the Vailala district in Papua. And as I've already related in the first chapter, our arrival coincided with extremely rough seas. You remember the opening story where the barge got turned over? That was at this point in his life after World War II. While my family remained in Port Moresby, I went on by motor barge, trying to reach the mouth of the Vailala River, and only God's providence saved me when that barge capsized at the Vailala Bar. At length, my family rejoined me in the Vailala mission station. We began our service for the Master. Well, a few months after our arrival, our food supplies were running desperately low. The southeast season seemed to be at its worst. On the coast of western Papua, boats were sheltering in the only haven. The seas kept crashing on the shoreline day after day, high waves. We had anxiously waited for a 6-month grocery order from Australia. In those days, we could receive mail only about every 4 to 6 weeks. Finally, there was a lull in the weather, and one coastal boat was able to cross the bar at Vailala River. We rejoiced, for soon we'd be enjoying good meals again, including fresh homemade bread. We'd been out of flour for weeks. But our rejoicing was short-lived. A shipping strike had prevented our grocery orders from being shipped from Sydney. In other words, the people who were supposed to load the stuff onto the boats in Australia had said, we're not working right now because we want to get paid more. So they didn't load the stuff onto the boat. So we had no alternative but to order supplies from Port Moresby instead. However, there was one glimmer of hope. Another coastal boat was to call in 2 weeks at the next high tide. Our prayers ascended to heaven as we tried to stretch our meager supplies, supplementing them with local foods, which we still found unpalatable, meaning it was hard for them to eat the local foods. It didn't taste good, and it was hard for them to digest. 2 weeks went by, but each day of those 2 weeks, the sea seemed to increase in fury. No boats ventured out from their harbors. This meant it would be at least 2 more weeks before another boat could come, if the weather permitted. Our concern increased as we saw our children, now four children in number, they have 4 kids now, rapidly losing weight, for their stomachs could not digest the native foods. By the time the next coastal boat was due to arrive, we were down to just 2 tin cans of food left. A 1-pound tin of cauliflower and a 1-pound tin of marmalade jam. Who's ever had jelly on cauliflower? Sounds tasty. No, it doesn't, but that's all they had to eat now. Seas were still rough, but perhaps had abated a little, so I summoned the teachers on the mission station for a prayer season. Earnest prayers ascended that night. We retired that night with the assurance that our prayers are soon to be answered. And for the next 3 days, favorable high tides were due to come in. The next morning, Friday, excitement mounted, for a runner came from the coast to tell us that a coastal boat was approaching Vailala Bar. Our mission station was about 5 miles inland from the plantation and the same distance from the coast. I left our mission station immediately with 12 stalwart students to walk 1.5 hours to the landing at the plantation. Our pathway through the heavy jungle was a single-file track, but the boys would be able to carry sufficient food for Sabbath. Our pathway through the heavy jungle was a single-file track, but the boys would be able to carry sufficient food for Sabbath. We were somewhat disappointed that the boat had not yet reached the landing place. We sat down to wait. We waited and waited and waited, and then another runner came through to say that, guess what? The seas were too rough for the boat to cross the sandbar, and it had turned back. As we turned with heavy hearts to walk back, I suggested we should kneel right there in the jungle and acknowledge that we would still trust God, although we couldn't understand. As we got up from our knees from praying, we were met by the plantation manager, a fine man. I had lent him a couple sheets of arc mesh wire some few weeks before so that he could make a fish trap. So I paused for a moment to talk to him and ask whether the fish trap was a success. He informed me that until the southeast season had really set in with its torrential rains, he used to pull fish out of the trap several times each week. But he went on to say that for the past few weeks, the river had been so flooded that he hadn't caught any fish in the trap. I said, well, let's pull the trap out of the river just in case there's fish in it. He said, oh, I already pulled it out of the water this morning and there was nothing. I didn't even set the trap again. You can see it. It's just sticking up above the water near the wharf. The fish trap was like a cylinder, a long tube, about 8 feet long, 3 feet in diameter, with a cone-shaped entrance at each end. Apparently, when you place it horizontally in the water, then it was an effective trap. But right now, it was standing vertically, with 1 foot of it just sticking above the muddy waters of the Vailala. It's not going to catch any fish that way. We bade farewell to the manager and again started off. But after 100 yards, I was overwhelmingly impressed to turn back. So I hesitated, then went back and asked the manager whether I could pull the trap out of the water. Yeah, pull it out if you want to see how it's made. I'll give you all that's in it. Sheepishly, I asked my boys, help me pull the trap up onto the wharf by the strong ropes attached to it. Imagine our surprise to find in that trap a large, clean fish called the buramundi, weighing just over 25 pounds. The manager was dumbfounded. How would it be possible for a fish to get into that trap unless it was flying through the air and dive vertically into the trap? I felt I knew how the fish got into that trap. I wondered then whether my wife would cook it if we carried it back to the mission. We hadn't eaten meat for years, but things were very severe now. The fish was tied to a pole. With one of the boys carrying each end, we set off. 6 boys walked in front, 2 of them carrying the fish, and 6 boys behind. About halfway back to the mission, another narrow pathway led off our track. Standing right on the edge of our track, where the other track veered off, stood a beautiful Papuan woman. I was deeply impressed with her lovely face, and in memory I can still see her standing there. Turning to me, she spoke in the Motuan language. The equivalent in English would be, Master, I have a gift for you. I thanked her and asked her what it was. Master, you see? Turning to my boys, I said, please see what that woman's gift is for me. The boys in chorus said, Master, there is no woman. Impatiently I said, the woman who just spoke to me. Master, no woman spoke to you. Now, it's not to my credit to say so, but I turned and said, you clowns, the woman who's standing there. But when I turned, she was gone. How I regretted saying those hasty words. Where the woman had been standing was a wheat sack, uncommon in these outback areas. Opening the sack, we found it to be well over half full of beautiful yellow yams, like a sweet potato. Did you know that type of yam could not be grown within many days' walking distance of our area? So the sack was not a type of sack that could be found in that area, and the yams were not a type of yam that could be found in that area. And the woman had disappeared. The boys hastily tied the bag to a pole. Again, one carrying each end, we set off for home. I found it hard to fight back the tears as I listened to the conversation of my boys as we walked back. Over and over again, I heard them say things such as, it must have been an angel, and why weren't we permitted to see the angel, or at least hear the angel speak? Upon our arrival at the mission station, I telephoned my wife. Our house on the top of a small hill about 300 yards away overlooked the mission compound. I could hear my wife crying over the telephone as I told her the boat had been unable to cross the bar. Then I asked her, if I were to bring home a fish, would you cook it? She replied, yes, scales and all. For our Friday evening meal, we had fish and yams. For breakfast on Sabbath, yams and fish. For lunch, fish and yams. And for the evening meal, yams and fish. And for breakfast, well, the same again. Shortly after breakfast, a runner came through from the coast to tell us that a boat had just crossed the river bar, and that boat carried our needed supplies. I agree wholeheartedly with my boys. It must have been an angel. But the thing that put me onto my knees in prayer was the fact that that heavenly being with her beautiful face had been humble enough to call me Master.
Be sure to tune in next time for more stories from the book I Saw God's Hand by E.L. Martin. And meanwhile, feel free to check out these videos as well as others on my YouTube channel with many more mission and Bible stories for kids and adults. God bless you.